afternoon, colleagues. We are starting with our briefing. Those who have their cell phones can just put them nicely on silent. Giving over to my brother, colleague first.
Thank you, Mr. Malloy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming through after a hectic day indeed. My name is Khumbudzo Ntshavheni from the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. We would also like to welcome viewers and listeners who are joining us from the various parts of our country, as well as the media fraternity, colleagues from the media fraternity who are joining us on our various online platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, we are meeting here at the invitation of our Honorable Minister, Minister Ntshavheni of the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, who has invited us to give us an update on the broadcast digital migration program, as well as the analog switch off that is been going on. This is in line with what the Minister committed some time back when she first outlined the revised program when Cabinet approved this in September. She will from time to time brief the media. The Minister is joined here by the COO of Centec, who is also the project leader of the Broadcast Digital Migration Program, as well as the DDG, the Deputy Director General in the department, Ms. Truly Manzini. Ladies and gentlemen, with those few words, I would like to invite the Honorable Minister to address the people of the country in terms of what she has prepared for us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Many developments involving the broadcast digital migration or program known as BDM and analog switch off have taken place since our last media briefing, which was held on the 24th of November 2021, and my solar debate address on the 15th February 2022. The first of those were the Minister of Communication and Digital Technologies determined and gazetted the 31st March 2022 as the end of dual elimination period and the analog switch off date. And secondly, the regulator ICASA successfully concluded the auction of the high demand spectrum, raising the much needed 14.4 billion rands for the national fiscus. This left the BDM process, particularly the analog switch off, with limited time to conclude for the National Treasury to access the over 14 billion proceeds of the spectrum auction. Furthermore, ICASA announced a transitional period for the broadcast service licensees and the signal distributors to ensure seamless transition process for the switch off of the remaining analog transmitters to the end of June 2022. And also the Gauteng High Court ruled in favor of concluding the much delayed broadcast digital migration, but deferred the ASO date to the 30th of June 2022 to allow the minister to complete installations to households that had applied on 31st October 2021. It is important to indicate that, as usual, ETV is since appealing this judgment. The Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition gazetted a request for comments on the DTIC's intention to prohibit the importation of analog television sets, to prohibit the dumping of analog TV sets in South Africa while supporting the penetration of digital television viewing. We have managed to conclude the SABC analog switch off in the 5 provinces of the Free State, Northern Cape, Northwest, Mpumalanga and Limpopo. And in the provinces where the analog has been switched off, we have concluded a process of rearranging spectrum, or what we call restaking, in these 5 provinces, thereby giving a way for the spectrum to be assigned for future technology usage. And then, in terms of the date for final switch off of analog signal and the end of dual elimination period, the Minister of Communication and Digital Technologies, in line with the paragraph 3.3.1 of the Broadcast Digital Migration Policy, published Government Notice number 958 on the Government Gazette number 31408 of 8 September 2008 as amended, determined the 31st March 2022 as the date for the final switch off of the analog signal and the end of dual elimination. the minister had considered the two conditions for the end of dual elimination period as set out in the digital migration regulations published in Government Notice number 1070, Government Gazette number 3600 of 14 December 2012, and satisfied herself that these conditions have been met as follows: that the Electronic Communications Network Service Licensee, a CENTEC appointed to provide signal distribution services to the SABC, had ensured that the digital broadcasting signal for the SABC has reached 100% through the terrestrial and satellite networks. And secondly, that the coverage requirements for the multiplexes 1 and 2 based on the terrestrial television broadcasting service license conditions have been met for those licensees who have appointed an electronic communications network service licensee to provide signal distribution services. And we are repeating and emphasizing this to indicate that in terms of policy, there is no requirement for the minister to do set-top box distribution. The set-top box distribution is a decision or a request by candidate because the government of the ruling party is a caring government and understood that the indigent families do need to be assisted. In terms of the requirement for the minister to determine in consultation with cabinet the date of the final switch off or the end of dual elimination, there are only those two conditions, and those conditions, as we talked to you today, have been satisfied, and they were satisfied a long time ago. In terms of the Gauteng High Court judgment and the progress with the set-top box installation, we welcome the Gauteng High Court judgment, including the deferment of the ASO date from the 31st of March 2022 to 30 June 2022. The deferment was to give government sufficient time to complete installations of set-top boxes for the households who have timelessly registered and thus are entitled to receive their set-top boxes before the analog switch off. And these households are those who applied on or before the 31st of October 2021. And that the June 2022 date coincides with the date ICASA has announced as the end of the transitional period for the broadcasting services and signal distributors. Thirdly, the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies committed to ensure that the 507,251 households that registered by the 31st of October 2021 have their set-top boxes installed by no later than 30 June 2022, and same for those the High Court directed that they be installed by no later than 30th September 2022. As of 25th April 2022, of the 507,251 households that by the 31st of October 2021, we have distributed 258,821 set-top boxes to beneficiary households, and of those 109,000 have been activated or installed. And we have over 6,973 beneficiaries that we could not found in their registered addresses, and their cell phone numbers were not reachable, or they do not provide cell phone numbers. We provide the list of those at the nearest post office to where these households are registered in terms of the provided addresses. We are pleased to report that the completion of installations to all households that registered and qualified by 31st October 2021 for the Gauteng province has been completed. The installations of set-top boxes for those who applied by 31st October 2021 in Northern Cape should be concluded in the next few days. We are targeting that before the 30th of April, we should have concluded the Northern Cape. Equally, we are on course to completing the remaining installations in the month of May and June in 2022 across the provinces. In terms of the impact of the KZN and Eastern Cape floods disasters on the STB installations, we are currently undertaking assessments on the impact of the recent floods in KZN and Eastern Cape on both the households with installed STBs and the structural integrity and existence of houses of registered households awaiting installations of set-top boxes. We have adopted a three-pronged approach, particularly for the districts of eThekwini and Ubu, due to high number of registrations and also the high impact of the floods. Firstly, we are quarantining the numbers that are still to be installed, but working with the Department of Human Settlements to verify the number of households both installed and awaiting installations to determine the extent of the damage to the homes for continuing installation or replacing damaged installations. We'll communicate as soon as possible the number of households whose installations will be delayed as we await the resettlement process. Secondly, for the registered households whose homes require resettlement or repair, we will work with human settlements to ensure installations or repairs are done when resettlements and repairs are completed for those households. And thirdly, we continue with the installations to households whose homes' physical structures were not damaged by the rains or were not badly damaged by the rains. And in terms of the end of life stage for analog technology and digital television as a new way of watching television in South Africa, we have previously indicated that we have received correspondence from the analog transmitters, technology manufacturers, and repairers that their last inventory stock code was in 2018, meaning that if the analog transmitter breaks down now, we do not have parts to replace that transmitter. On the 24th of February 2022, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, on behalf of the International Trade Administration Commission of South Africa, and following a request from the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, gazetted an invitation for the public to comment on the introduction of a policy directive on the importation of analog television sets. The intention of the policy directive is to prohibit importers, retailers, wholesalers, and manufacturers from shipping to and importation of all analog television sets classified under HSA 528.7 after 31st March 2022, meaning that after the 31st March 2022, you can no longer import an analog television or manufacture an analog television in the country of South Africa, which standard I have mentioned, which classification I have mentioned. Understanding that the retail market will have analog TV sets that will remain even when the importation has been stopped, the Minister of Communications and Digital Technology has commenced consultations with the TV sets manufacturers and distributors within the country with the purpose of gazetting a policy directive to require for all digital television sets in South Africa to carry a Go Digital stamp to assist consumers from purchasing analog television sets or to be able to identify the correct digital television sets. And given the prevalence of smart television sets in this country, Centec will commence a process to create a channel to carry streaming content or OTT from the current DTT and DTH platform. More details will be shared during the department's budget vote speech on the 18th May 2022. We will also provide further details on additional channels on the DTT DTH platform during the budget vote speech with the purpose of bringing new and additional content with new owners as part of growing and diversifying South Africa's creative industry and transformation of the media. In conclusion, we are currently implementing an accelerated distribution and installation of set-top drives in the remaining 4 provinces of Gauteng, Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal to ensure that we meet the deadline of both the 30th of June 2022 and the 30th of September 2022. The government of South Africa remains committed to its objective of supporting indigenous households to ensure universal access of digital services. We will commence with the end of September target immediately when we conclude a province for those who were registered after the 21st of October 2022, as it is the case in Gauteng province. We are also in the process of creating STB capacity for subsequent registrations and placement in the retail market for future replacement and access to any requiring citizen. I need to clarify this, that we are going to put the government set-top box on the retail market. We'll announce further details soon, so that those who do not qualify for government subsidy or government support should be able to buy a government set-top box in the retail market. And lastly, we are continuing to increase our capacity to install more set-top boxes daily, and Centec is out on a call for STB installer applications to augment our installation capacity. Therefore, Centec is consistently intensifying installer capacity nationally to ensure that all registered and qualifying households are migrated within the set timelines, and those that are outside those timelines, that they are connected as speedily as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honourable Minister, for a comprehensive report indeed. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we will open our session to questions. We will have, let's take the first round of 5 questions. And we take 3 questions online, and then we'll take 2 questions from those who are here in the house. Can you check with the producers? Questions, first 3?
Thanks, Chair. Currently, there's no questions on the WhatsApp line.
There's no question yet.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, questions from the house. We have questions. It was indeed an informative and a very comprehensive brief. It did not surprise me if there are no questions. It was very detailed and giving confidence. Any question? In the absence of any question, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us. Thank you so much for coming through. We really appreciate. Okay.
I think there's a question that's came in now.
Just come through. I just hope it works.
Yes,
A
from
little more.
Andy Siwe Makinana from Sunday Times says that the department told the High Court in March that it would be able to install 500,000 set-top boxes in 2 weeks in all the provinces by then March 31 deadline. Did you manage to install these set-top boxes within those 2 weeks? And how many did you install? And how many households will you have to install a day to make the June deadline? And the last question: who is going to manufacture the government set-top box, or is this just the existing stock at SAPO warehouses? What procurement processes are being followed? That's only the only question. Sure, thanks.
It's technically a number of sub questions.
Yes.
I just hope see that.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you very much, Minister, for a detailed BDM update. In terms of the question from Sunday Times, I think Andrew asked the question in terms of the targets for end of March. The Minister gave a clear indication in terms of progress. The total number of distributed set-top boxes, again, the 507, as of the 25th of April, is 248,000. And of those, we confirmed that 109 has been activated. In terms of our plan, we are to ensure that all the set-top boxes, the 507 that has been set by the court to be installed by the end of June, is indeed installed during the remaining period. So of the 507, we will take what is remaining and conclude it in the month of May and June. In terms of the installer capacity, you have to take about the 400 that is remaining and distribute it over the active working days of the month, which is about 22 days per month. Obviously, April was full of holidays, but we are fortunate that May going forward we will not have as many holidays. So one looks at anything between 5 and 10,000 installations per day to conclude the installations. But we do have plans. We are increasing capacity. Minister highlighted that Centric is increasing installer capacity. So we're quite comfortable with the target. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I need to indicate a few things. So when we assured the High Court that we are going to install the remaining 507,000, we had planned not to sleep. So the judges were very generous and allowed us to sleep. If you had followed us on social media, we had teams across the country We were working non-stop, non-sleeping. So when the High Court came out, then we said, then we don't have to sleep. But the undertaking we had made even to the High Court was that the 31st of March, if it had arrived and we had not installed those who had applied by the 31st of October 2021, who were 507,000 odd, we would not have switched off until those were connected or restored. That is the undertaking. I did not only make that to the High Court, I made that to Cabinet before in September, on the 29th of September 2021, and also to the nation on the 5th of October 2021. In terms of the procurement, if you had indicated there are manufacturers of set-top boxes here, in terms of the current numbers that we need to install, we have the capacity that are within the government that have already been procured. So the numbers that have applied, that have been installed, we have the set-top boxes. We don't have to install. We don't have to procure them. In terms of the new ones that we want to procure and put in the market, they will follow the due process, which has nothing to do with me. It has to do with USASA, who are the custodian of the program, and they know what to do to follow that process. They've done it previously, and they've got a mechanism to install. So that's what I need to indicate, and I want to thank you for the questions. And I hopefully the other questions that will come through will send written replies so that we don't hold the media briefing just to forward the two questions we can then send the written replies to those specific questions we gather. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, this then brings us to the end of our session. Thank you.
Ya, ke mmoditse baba. Ntse ke monitor a tle ka phase.
That's good.
And we will get it.